Okay.
Right, there you go.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate the introduction and the invitation to present on Tableau Tuesday. Before I get going, I do seem to have the share button grayed out in my WebEx, Steve, so I'm not sure if there's something you can do to enable that so I can share my slides here. There we go.
All right, you should be good.
Yes, sir. And then let me go ahead and share. Okay, and let's go to view. And just give me an okay, please, or a thumbs up saying that you can see my screen.
Yeah, you're looking good.
Okay, and one more thing before I get going, preemptive apology. We are doing Zoom school with kids in the background, so apologize if you pick up on any of that background noise. But yeah, life in 2020 is carried over into 2021. So we're going to be talking about building dashboards and visualizations for user engagement and even amazement, perhaps. But before that, wanted to do just a quick background to give you some context as to who I am, a bit of my journey, how I came to be the Iron Viz 2020 champion. My name is Christian Felix. I am a University of Arizona graduate. My background is actually in finance. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in finance. Upon graduation, I got a job working in finance at Rhetorical Technologies in Tucson, Arizona. I was working in financial planning, doing a lot of the quarterly reporting to corporate and things like that. As part of that job, I ended up working with IT on a lot of process improvements, exposed to business intelligence, analytics, dashboarding with the SAP Business Objects dashboard and business intelligence suite. This was back in 2012, 2013. So the field was growing and maturing at that point. And there was a tool called Excelsius that allowed me to really turn a lot of my Excel very simple reports into some better looking dashboards. So that got me excited about the field. From there, I started doing a graduate degree in analytics at Texas A&M. And so there was a lot of statistical modeling, a lot of data exploration, and there I discovered Tableau. So that was back in 2013. And so when I discovered Tableau, this whole new world of data exploration, visualization was opened up. It really made so much more productive and efficient a lot of the things that I was doing in some of the other business intelligence and statistics tools, and I fell in love with the tool. And so at my prior company, Raytheon, I was part of a team that helped roll the tool out to the business, working in IT. And about 5 years ago, I transitioned over to Roche, which I work for now, and I use Tableau every day to help us see and understand our data in the quality area, performing on-market surveillance. I also have the CFA Institute. That's also part of my journey. So I was pursuing that designation, and a lot of the level 2 curriculum for that designation was quantitative methods. And so that got me excited about how to use data to really predict, tell a story, and help us understand the world around us. So all those things led me up to Iron Viz. And so this is a snapshot, a picture in pure joy after I won the competition, after it was announced, and this was back in October last year. And this was the visualization that I produced in 20 minutes. I called it the air we breathe, and we'll get into some more detail. We'll actually dive into the dashboard as part of this presentation. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of it up front, just to give you some context. So today's objective, data storytelling for engagement. So we're going to go over some of the psychology and anatomy of data storytelling, why it's important, and then actually looking at it in practice using the Iron Viz dashboard that I just showed as sort of a use case. Okay, but first, I wanted to play this quick video. And there's no sound. It's about 1.5 minutes. just watch it, and as you're watching it, just try and note to yourself what's happening. Okay, so that's the end of the video, and the point of all that is, well, first some context. So this was developed many decades ago by a couple of sociologists. They showed this video to dozens of people they were trying to study and get an understanding of human behavior, how they interpreted shapes like this. And the most common interpretation, there was no allusion to rectangles, circles, or shapes. It was, in almost every instance, personified. So there was angry people, there was a boyfriend and a girlfriend, there was someone that was upset and trying to chase another person, there was somebody breaking down the walls in the room because of their rage and anger. And so what the outcome of the study was that we as humans have such a tendency to craft and to create story. It's almost our default setting out of things that may or may not even be stories. So applying this to data visualization, it's good to know that, because when consumers are looking at your data visualization, they're going to want to try to craft a story. And it's your job as somebody who's putting together a data visualization and communicating it to help them with that, to make it easy for them to understand what the story that's being told is. And these are just some quotes that I thought were pertinent. If you wish to influence an individual or a group to embrace a particular value in their daily lives, tell them a compelling story. So it's that fact that facts alone don't really move people. It's those facts connected to a narrative or a story or something that appeals to their emotions, not just their logic. And so as somebody who is, or who was a self-confessed, just not very good public speaker initially, I did a lot of studying and reading about what makes a good presentation or public speech. And you can go all the way back to ancient philosophy, Aristotle, where he presents these three different categories of public speaking. You have the ethos, which speaks to the speaker's credibility and character. The logos, which is an appeal to the logic and reason. And the pathos, which is an appeal to the emotion and heart. And what Aristotle was saying is, it's when these three things are optimized and done well, that's when persuasion is most optimally accomplished or naturally accomplished. And so you have, in our case, visualizing data, there is application. How so? So as part of the data, you're trying to both make sure that the viewer is aware that you are credible. So trying to make sure they're aware that you do have that ethos, that you do have some expertise in the area. And if you don't, like I didn't in Iron Viz for this earth science subject, you want to make sure that you're pulling in resources that are credible. So you want to make sure you're citing experts in the field, you're citing your data so that your viewer knows that what you're presenting to them is credible, the character is reputable, etc. And then you want to use visuals to appear to the logic, right? So you want to use, you want to make it as clear as possible for them to see what you're trying to communicate in the story. And so it's really rejecting the temptation to overcomplicate a visual, to create fancy radial charts or pie charts or circle charts or anything like that, when a simple bar chart or maybe even a number will do. And then narrative. So the pathos is you really standing on the shoulders, leveraging the ethos, the logos, to make that human connection, to really appeal to the audience and bring that data to life as part of the story that you're telling. And I can't take credit for this. This is really all part of a fantastic book that I read this year by Brent Dykes called Effective Data Storytelling. I recommend that book if this interests you in any way. Okay, data visualization alone is not data storytelling. So there's really a paradigm, a dichotomy, and I see this a lot in my work. Not everything works for data storytelling. You use Tableau certainly for both, but you have automated dashboards that are meant to bring awareness to an issue. They're getting daily data, and they're just meant to provide high-level, quick awareness, not necessarily to tell a story. So you have dashboards that are automated on a continuous data feed. They're meant to be exploratory, right? There's filters, there's parameters that users can explore to dive in and analyze the data. On the other hand, you have these things that really make for or lend themselves to a data story. So you have a curated data set. You're really trying to promote a certain insight that you've already uncovered in the data. And so with those things, you can leverage the data and use it to really further a data story and to tell a data story. So here's an example of a dashboard. I just grabbed this off the internet. There's nothing wrong with this dashboard. I think it probably looks familiar to a lot of us, maybe not familiar, but similar to dashboards that we've put together. And it's good. It provides high-level awareness. You have KPI tiles up top on the front. You have different ways of visualizing the data, whether in maps, donut charts, horizontal bar charts, etc. And it does provide that high-level situational awareness, but it doesn't really tell a story, right? So this is an example, going back to the last slide, of a dashboard that falls into this category. The dashboard I produced for IronViz, on the other hand, and what I'm talking about today, is more of a data storytelling approach. Less of this, more of actually trying to persuade an audience to a specific viewpoint. Okay, and so when you're trying to do that, there's a paradigm shift that happens. I think many of us who find ourselves in this industry, we're analytical in nature. It's easy for us to appeal to logic, but there's a bit of a paradigm shift where we have to put on our storyteller hat and try and understand how people will best receive the message. And so often that's in a narrative format. And so this past year, there's just been some amazing examples in regards to the pandemic, COVID-19, of data visualization. This one I have up on the screen is from the Washington Post. I don't remember who produced it, but it appeared in the Washington Post, and it's basically a simulation of how the exponential process of how the disease spreads. And it was a simulation, and I believe it was one of the most widely viewed visuals, possibly of all time. And so I knew, in regards to my IronViz, if there was a possibility of producing any sort of simulation that would really engage the audience, I wanted to try and do it. So I have this scatter plot that I use to simulate the relationship between air pollution and GDP per capita. And there's some statistics in here that I'll go over a little bit later in the presentation. But really, I think it really furthered my story because the motion captured the attention of the audience, and the color really signified that there was improvement if this condition, this financial condition of nominal GDP per capita were to improve. Okay, so some more inspiration. This was another example this past year, back in March, Wall Street Journal, front page. You have this just enormous line on this bar chart that really jumps off the graph, literally. It serves as really a divider almost between these two segments of text. And I think it really communicates just the drastic nature of the change incredibly well. And so I knew if there was a way in my IronViz to accomplish a similar visual effect, it would really further my story. So the headline here is US cases, jobless claims soar, and you have this visual that really complements this headline so well because the jobless claims are just really jumping off the chart. And so what I did to try and replicate that is I have this bar chart on the top of my visual that in this picture represents the count of cities. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, we're looking at the colors represent cities that are experiencing healthy breathing air in green, moderately healthy in white, and then unhealthy in yellow. And so what I wanted to do, both to personify the data and to really replicate that visual effect that we saw in the last slide with the Wall Street Journal, when the user changed this from cities to population, I wanted this bar chart to really jump off the graph. In addition to that, I wanted these observations that were relatively small and uniform in size when you're looking at cities to really pop so that the user would, it would really just capture their attention and be striking. And so what happens is when this parameter, and I'll show this later on when we jump into the dashboard, but when the parameter gets changed from city to population, the bar chart was set up on the dashboard so that when that change happened in the parameter, the bar would be off the page of the dashboard. And that was intentional, and it was to really further the story of this difference, although it's similar when you look at cities, when you look at actually people, the difference between unhealthy and healthy breathing air is just incredibly dramatic. And so that's the story that I wanted to tell using that effect. Okay, so the key elements of a data story, and you're gonna see these in the dashboard when I pull them up here in just a minute. And this isn't meant to be comprehensive, but I think in general, if you're looking to tell a data story with data visualization as a tool, you really want to identify a problem to be solved, a challenge to overcome. What is the obstacle? And then what are the insights that you've identified to potentially resolve that obstacle or challenge? And then lastly, what's the takeaway message? Right? What is the resolution and path forward that you're recommending to the viewer? So a problem to be solved, insights identified, and a resolution and a path forward for improvement. All right, so says thank you. That's the end of the slides. Certainly, if you have any questions on those, I think we're going to open it up about the last 10 minutes. You can ask any questions on those. But what I want to do now is just jump into the dashboard real quick and show you some more technical ways that I was able to implement some of the things I did in the IronViz. All right. So I'm transitioning now to the dashboard. Just confirmation again from somebody that you can see the dashboard on my screen now.
Yeah, we see you.
Okay. So this is the dashboard. And I'm going to try and cover all the features that I included here. Some of them are more technical, more complex, more advanced. Some of them are more beginner in nature. And I'm going to try and cover all of them. I think the assumption here is that we have a lot of people on this call coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and skill levels. So hopefully there's something in here, no matter what skill level you're at, that you can take away and say, okay, this is something that I can apply to my own context or situation and that I find interesting and useful. So first of all, because my objective here was telling this story with the data, I wanted to have an artistic appeal to it. I didn't want it to just be a regular business looking dashboard. I wanted it to have some artistic and aesthetic appeal. And so to accomplish that, and I wasn't the only one, the other contestants did it as well, I used what I call just a dashboard canvas. So this is an image that I made beforehand using a photo editor. And it's nothing fancy. Really all it is this text, these colors, and this very subtle blue box, and these header markings. And so it's just an image that I'm using to really lay everything else on top of. And so you can see that we have really only 4 worksheets. We have only 4 worksheets in this dashboard. They're all floating. So if we go here, we can see the maps floating. The scatter plot is floating. All of these are floating on top of this image that I have basically fit to the dimensions of the dashboard. And part of it was what I mentioned earlier in terms of trying to create something that is aesthetically appealing and that's engaging to the audience. But part of it is also just the Iron Viz time constraints, right? You have 20 minutes and that's it to produce a visualization. And so there was definitely some time savings consideration that played into just using this image. Certainly there are advanced photo editors you can use like Photoshop, Illustrator, but you can also use PowerPoint simply to create a dashboard image canvas to then lay your Tableau worksheets on top of. Okay, so I have that image. I think one of the first things that I want to note is from a psychological perspective, your viewer is going to start with the upper left-hand corner. That's just where people start. People read top to bottom, left to right. Viewing a dashboard is no different. And so Iron Viz is kind of a tricky animal because you're trying to create something that's innovative, that is new, that really blows people away, but you're also trying to make it as simple as possible so that people can understand it just by looking at it in the first few minutes. And so I knew I had to be very clear and specify things very clearly and right off the bat so that people could really interpret the dashboard as easily as possible. And so I use the upper left-hand corner to both provide a legend so that they can see what these colors in all of the dashboard are referring to. So this legend I embedded in the title. It's not interactive, but it communicates right up front, upper left-hand corner of the dashboard, what the colors represent. So these are categories provided by the EPA of milligrams or micrograms, the air pollution, basically. So 12.1 or less is healthy, 12.1 to 35.4 is moderate, greater than 35 is unhealthy. Categories provided by the EPA that I used here to color the dashboard and categorize the dashboard. So communicating right up front is essential to making sure your users are on the same page. From there, I'll go into the bar chart. So this looks like a simple bar chart. It is in essence, but there are some nuances that I think are worth showing. One, as I mentioned in the slideshow, it's driven by the parameter, right? So the user can either view a count of cities with healthy, moderately healthy, or unhealthy, or population. And that's just accomplished with some simple logic embedded in this bar height measure. And for those of you that didn't watch Iron Viz, I do like to use the find functionality, the search bar, quite a bit. So it's very useful. It filters things down. So if you have a lot of fields, a lot of dimensions, measures, you can just start typing in the name, and Tableau will automatically down filter things that match the string that you're entering in. And so this is just simple logic based off of the parameter, the CP parameter, that changes the measure in the view. Okay, now what's a little bit clever, sneaky, not easily apparent in here is this invisible reference line. And so I use reference lines pretty regularly in my work, not for this use case, but for other use cases. For example, if I wanted to fix a date range, I could create an invisible reference line that would ensure a specific date range was shown in the view, regardless of what data was in the view. In this case, what I've done is I have this reference line that I've added to the bar chart that changes. So the reference line itself changes just like the measure based off of the parameter selection. So when city is selected, the reference line is going to be at 200. When population is selected, it's going to jump to 3 million. Why those numbers? Well, again, the intention for me was to tell this story. And the main story that I'm trying to communicate was that there is a pretty vast inequality between cities that have healthy and unhealthy breathing air. And so I'm trying to use this bar chart to communicate that story, and the reference line helps me do that. How? So when city is selected, this delta is really minimized. Yes, you can see that there is a difference between unhealthy, moderately healthy, et cetera, but it's minimized because the reference line really increases the length, the size of the y-axis. However, when population is selected, the number of people living in unhealthy breathing air really approaches the number I've specified for the reference line, so that this delta here is maximized. And so that's what I was trying to use this reference line to really accomplish, to maximize this delta. In addition to the reference line, the placement of this particular worksheet was such that, as I mentioned, I wanted to have this bar jump off the chart. And so I put the y coordinate at -20. So typically your dashboard will start at 0. I could have had it at 0, but going back to that Wall Street Journal bar chart where you had the jobless claims really jumping off the page, I wanted to try and replicate that. So I had this come up here at -20, and then you change this and you get the visual effect of, wow, there's just a ton of people. This is a huge problem that needs to be resolved or addressed. So that was the goal with the bar chart. Okay, so I think I'll save the map for last because it's perhaps the most complex. Let's go to the scatter plot. Okay, so the scatter plot shows the relationship between PM2.5 air pollution and nominal GDP per capita. And these are predicted values, and I'm not going to bring up my Tableau prep workflow, but what I did in the analysis part of this that you probably didn't see in Iron Viz is I created a trend line, and then I edited the trend line. Let's see. Okay. And so what I was trying to do is find a formula to that I could then use to model changes in air pollution based off of changes in nominal GDP. And so right now you have this trend line that if you look at the formula that Tableau produces using the trend line relationship, it is statistically significant and the R squared is relatively high. But what I did is I changed this from a linear model to a power model. And then all of a sudden you have this much more robust relationship. So the p-value is still statistically significant, R squared increases dramatically. And you also have this formula that Tableau gives you that you can then use to model the effect of pollution on changes in the other variable, in this case, GDP. So I use that formula provided by Tableau to basically model changes, air pollution based off of changes in GDP of 10, 20, 30%. Let me get rid of these trend lines real quick. Okay. And then I use the pages shelf. So this change that I put in the pages shelf represents the change in nominal GDP. And what I'm doing is I'm basically allowing the user to animate this simulation, if you want to call it that. I'm using the history because I think showing where an observation came from is very powerful. And so I used the history in the pages shelf to show the last 5. We don't have 5, we have 4, but the last 5 to show both the marks and the trails and to have some element of fading such that the furthest, the last observations fade out of view eventually. And so when you play this, let's go ahead and move it. I think incorporating the history is really helpful because you can see how the differences produced by the model really play out in various cities. So for example, if you look at Oslo, Norway, if you were to increase GDP by 30%, the impact on air pollution is pretty minimal. It's pretty nominal. On the other hand, if you look at some of these other cities in China, some of these other cities in India, who have a very small GDP, that same percentage of GDP increase has a drastic increase or decrease, I'm sorry, in air pollution. And so you have these cities over here on the left side of the x-axis that are really falling precipitously based off of these changes in GDP. And I thought that was a powerful story. So a small change in GDP percent has a differing impact based off of the current level of nominal GDP in cities. Okay, the reference lines here, let's see, are accomplished through these. So this is city selection. So here it's just specifying a city based off of, let me show this, based off of the city selected in the parameter. And if the country city equals the parameter selection, it's going to show that predicted GDP, and then show the trend line as well as the values. All right, so let me go back to here. And what I've also done here is allowed a user with a parameter action to either click within the scatter plot or within the map and update the viz. And so a user can look at the viz and say, okay, I see perhaps this observation way out here in the scatter plot. I'm interested in understanding more about it. They can click within the scatter plot. It'll then provide them the GDP and the pollution number associated with the city, and it'll update the map as well. And that is driven by parameter action. So this parameter action targets this country city parameter. It updates the country city field in the viz, and clearing the selection is going to keep the current value. So even if I clear the selection, click out of the worksheet, it's going to keep the city that I previously selected using the action. And so just a really useful way of adding some interactivity to your dashboards and allowing the user to explore. Okay, so that's the bar chart. That is the scatter plot. Now to the map. So how did I create this map? It's a good question. So let me dive into it. First of all, if you're familiar with Mapbox, you know that Tableau and Mapbox have really seamless integration. And so I used a custom Mapbox map that I created in Mapbox Studio to create this sort of dark blue, subtle world map that I used to overlay my observations on. And so I just called it basic. But if you have a Mapbox map, if you're familiar with Mapbox Studio, you can just, it's as simple as really entering the URL for your Mapbox map. Tableau will consume that and use that map in your visual. All right, so what about these observations and these lines? Really, this map is just a dot map, right? It's not much different than what you get in Show Me, except for the lines. And before I go into how I made the lines, I think it's not just aesthetics. I think it was important for me to really connect the disaggregated data that you see in the map to the aggregated data. So you have all these observations that are disaggregated. And what I wanted to do was really, first of all, show how these flowed up and connected to the aggregate data representing the people or cities. And so it's more than just aesthetics, it's functional, but it also, I think, really serves to highlight the global divide. So you can see just by looking at the map, just going from west to east, a lot of this section over here is green. It's healthy, but if you look at over here, it's unhealthy. And it all pretty much naturally left to right flows up to these bars. So the lines, yes, they are beautiful. They add a nice aesthetic to the viz, but they're also functional as well. All right, so these are sigmoid curves, and I don't have time. I have about 5 more minutes before I'm going to open it up for questions to really dive into how you create sigmoid curves. There are numerous blog posts out there in the community of how to create sigmoid curves. But what I'm doing in this case, because these curves are overlaid on a map, is I'm incorporating the longitude of the location as an endpoint to the line. And so you have this curve X that I'm using here in the column shelf. I'm using the longitude of that location, of that city, to create the curve. And so what this involves is densifying data. Again, lots of blog posts in the community. I use Tableau Prep to really create many additional rows to create these lines that they look like lines, but really what they are is just, they're just points. They're curves that are close enough together because the data is densified such that many more rows have been created to give the illusion of lines. And so you have curve X, curve Y, and what I did is once I created these sigmoid curves, I changed the geographic role on them to longitude. And so when I did that, I was able to drag them to the column shelf and have them basically follow along in the same way that any longitude or latitude coordinate would on a map. I specified the start points. Here, for example, the start points are giving me these points that tie to the bar chart. So I'm assured that these lines ultimately are flowing up to the location that I want them to in the dashboard. Let's see. In addition, I think making sure, I mentioned sort of making sure that you're communicating your expertise, whether you yourself have it or you're referencing or standing on the shoulders of others who have it. And a big part of that is just making sure that you're documenting your sources well. And so using the navigation button feature in Tableau is really helpful. In this case, I've created a button that is taking me to the sources dashboard, and I click on it. And I have data source citations. I've included the methodology that I implemented to create the dashboard. And this just helps give some credibility to you as you're trying to persuade the audience to your point. So citing your data, including the methodology so people are absolutely clear about what you're looking at, what you've done to produce the visual is really helpful. Also, citing your inspiration and your design attribution, I think, lends some credence to that as well. Okay, so these are navigation buttons in Tableau. Make it very easy. You don't have to do this with action filters anymore. You can just add a navigation button and navigate to a different dashboard. Last but not least, making sure that you have a legend so people know what your numbers represent. This was something I snuck in at the very end before my 20 minutes was up. It was quite stressful, but when somebody clicks in to population, I want to make sure that there is a reference point to what the size of these observations represent in terms of people. So I added this legend that I created as an image simply in PowerPoint and included in the dashboard. And so to wrap up the storytelling conversation, hopefully you've seen a little bit of it here, a problem to be solved or a challenge to be overcome. In this case, it's air pollution, right? We have this global inequality in air pollution. It then begs the question, why? So you've identified the problem. What are the insights you've identified to potentially resolve the problem? For me, in this story, it was the nominal GDP gap. So you have certain countries, cities in the world that have high nominal GDP. Those cities, those locations all tend to have very good air pollution. So I identify the item to potentially overcome the problem, and then lastly, the path forward. I actually didn't spell it out as clearly as I hoped to, but the path forward involves addressing these wealth inequalities that contribute to the air pollution inequality. And so hopefully that was a useful use case for you to really see how data storytelling works in practice and how I applied it to my Iron Viz presentation. I know that was very quick and I covered a lot, but we have about 10 minutes left. So Steve or anybody else, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Yeah, Christian, that was fantastic. Thanks so much. I got a couple of questions. When I was watching Iron Viz, one of the things that really struck me with this visualization was you were trying to tell a story, but you didn't fall into the trappings of kind of slapping us in the face with trying to come to the conclusion that you wanted us to come to, and the typical trappings of the way we do that is by color, right? Well, that yellow bar could have very easily been bright red, danger, but you really chose to be subtle with your color selections, and to me, how that came off was that it made the entire dashboard more credible. To me, it came off as fact-based journalism versus opinion-based journalism. I was just wondering if when you were designing this dashboard, were those things swirling around in your head when you chose the colors that you chose?
Yeah, that's a great question, and they certainly were. I think color is a big contributor to the tone and the emotional appeal that you're making to the dashboard consumer. And so you have to choose wisely. You have to choose a color palette that matches your topic. And so this is a very earth sciencey topic. And so I had that dark blue, and I had sort of like you mentioned, a subtle green, white, and yellow that I think that there's a good divergence between those. There's a good contrast, but they're not over the top like a red would be. And yes, PM2.5 air pollution is bad. It can lead to many ailments and illnesses. But so often red is used, and this is different across cultures, of course, but so often I think we see red, we see death, we see horrible, we see, and I certainly didn't want to communicate that in this viz because I just didn't think it was justified. Again, PM2.5 air pollution is bad, causes ailments, but I didn't think red would be appropriate. So using this more earth science color palette, I thought worked well.
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. We answered most of the questions, or I think all of the questions in the Q&A panel, but I know one that hasn't been asked, but oh yeah, hold on a second. We do have some questions, but I know one that's going to be asked is this visualization, did you put your dashboard maybe up on Tableau Public that people can actually download and kind of see the inner workings of what went on behind the scenes, or is it available for anybody?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I covered all that very quickly. Certainly didn't do justice to the technical calculations behind these curves or some of the other things. It is on my Tableau public profile. It is downloadable. So, and in the citations, I do reference the blog posts that I use to really create these curves on a map. So if anybody was interested in creating curves like this, they had a use case for it, then they could download my dashboard, reverse engineer, and also visit the very detailed instructions provided by Ken Flerlage and Wendy Shija, I believe, at this URL. So yes, it is available.
Perfect. So what I'll do is I will link to your Tableau public profile in the YouTube recording, so that way we can drive people towards that.
Cool.
I do have a question around, I guess the chart on the lower left. I think what they're referring to is your legend and how you actually built that out.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably deceptively simple. All it is a PowerPoint slide with embedded circles and dashed lines tied to numbers. And so when you're in PowerPoint, you have a blank slide. You're then selecting, you're dragging like so, and then you're right-clicking and you're saving them all as a picture. And so then you have a PNG file of all of these shapes and lines you've created in PowerPoint that you can then take into Tableau and embed as an image. And so it's really quite simple. But at the same time, I do believe it gives you a really nice visual legend, perhaps even more so. As good as the default legends are from Tableau, perhaps even better than the ones that they give you natively.
Yeah, cool. So we are having some questions just around, your neat little trick around on the reference lines to get those bar charts to kind of fly off the page. Um, can you just explain a little bit more how you approach that, what setting that reference line to 300 million actually accomplishes?
Well, I think let's try this. Okay, so this is without the reference line. Okay, it's not quite the same effect, is it? So, and part of it is the location. So if I were to move this down from negative 20y to 0, yeah. But what it's doing is it's locking the y-axis on the bar chart, because without the reference line, the axis goes automatic, and then it'll adjust based off of the range in the measure selected. And so in this case, it's giving us a little padding. We have a 60, and this looks like the axis is taking us up to 70. And so I could have stuck with this, but again, the point I was trying to make, Steve, was that this difference here is drastic, and not in cities, but in population. And so yes, you can still see it here, but really what it served to do was to minimize the perceived difference in the cities. And so adding this back in, and then edit, none. I just felt like having the reference line when city was selected up around 200 really did a better job of just leaving the access free to automatically update. It really did a better job of minimizing this difference when you look at cities. And I just felt like it really helped me further that story. Yes, cities are the same, 55, 60 is close, but population, wow, you have this huge difference. So I don't know if that answered the question, but it was really all based off of the visual effect I was trying to achieve.
Got it. And just circling back to the circles on your legend, there was no rhyme or reason to the actual size of those circles. You just kind of created that visualization, and I guess the question that people are struggling with is like, well, how did you set the size of the circles to kind of correspond, or actually, kind of closely match what the circles are in the chart?
Yeah. So, so there's a couple ways I would answer that. One, I edited the sizes by range, and I fixed the range such that the minimum was 1 and the max value was the actual max value that I wanted to have it capped at. So in this case, 7,657,000 yada yada people. So I was able to edit the sizes based off of the functionality that Tableau offers natively to do that. And so that's how I controlled it in the Viz. In terms of creating the legend, it was kind of eyeballing it. And looking at it now, I probably didn't do a perfect job, because this 7 million looks a little bit bigger than certainly some of the biggest cities here. But precision or not, I think it does give you a sense of where the big cities are. And that's really what it's intended to do. It's meant to give you a general idea of population from city to city.
And I think it's probably a good idea for us to pass on to our Tableau dev team, being able to do that with our circle charts to have a legend that looks like that out of the box would be great.
That would be very cool, because you do see a lot of those in data journalism and other visual formats. This same sort of design. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Christian, for taking the time to talk with us today. I really appreciate it. This is fantastic. You know, I was blown away by the work you did in the Iron Viz. I voted for you. I was happy you won. You know, it's just great, and really loved what you bring. So thank you so much, and thanks everybody for joining today. Again, we'll have this recording put up onto our YouTube channel. We'll reference Christian's Tableau public page so you can actually see this viz and get your hands on it. And other than that, we'll just see you next month at our next Tableau Tuesday. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you. See ya.
All right. Have a great one.